Hey everyone, MarsJGate here bringing you guys a brand new game review. Today we're going to be reviewing Final Fantasy 15, which I just finally finished up on, and I have to say that I am more than impressed with it, both from a visual and a gameplay standpoint. But while there are a ton of things in this game that I absolutely love, there are a number of things that I cannot stand. So, without further ado, because I know this review took too damn long, sorry about that, let's jump into it. So the premise of the story is basically you play as Noctis, a prince who sets out with his three friends to marry the Oracle, Lunafreya. And in typical Final Fantasy charm, things go pretty south pretty fast. His father is killed and the Imperials capture his city, so now it becomes a battle to reclaim his throne. That's the general layout of the start of the story. I won't go any deeper with the story, but I did want to talk about it. At first, it started off great. Towards the middle act, you start to notice that it starts dipping. Things don't start making sense. It's like they kind of wanted to throw plot elements in there and see what sticks, but then never bothered to follow up on any of them. And in the final game, this is all kind of convoluted. And it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't exactly great. It didn't have that satisfying kick to it that usual Final Fantasy games have. The characters in the games are a different story completely. I thought the characters were great, but they did have some flaws in terms of their dialogue here and there. Noctis and his three travel companions, Ignis, Gladios, and Prompto, do a fantastic job of setting up this brotherhood between them, not only through the dialogue, but also in real-time interactions. During battles, you might get knocked on your ass, and one of them might run over and pull you up. Or, if you hit a blind spot on an enemy, it might activate a link attack with a companion doing more damage. But it's ultimately those random dialogue conversations and the random cutscenes you might get that really sets that bond up nicely. Plus, each of them have their own individual skills or hobbies. Like Noctis is really into fishing. Prompto is a great photographer who captures tons of awesome pictures on the journey, which you can view and save. And Ignis, well, Ignis is a cook. And as you progress through the game and find new ingredients, either from wild plants, beating enemies, or even eating new foods at diners, he learns new recipes, which each of those give specific time buffs to character stats. All of these elements mix with each character, giving them their own unique personality and making them a blast to play with. On top of that, Final Fantasy has a large number of important NPC characters that do a great job of building their own character and personality. Thing is, most of them you'll ever interact with is during side missions, but their personality and style is so unique that it carries this memorable trait with it. But I think we can all agree that the story and characters aren't the main source of entertainment when it comes to a main franchise Final Fantasy game. Unless it's 13, and in which case I think the community has already done a pretty decent job in voicing their opinion on that. No, what we want and what we love is that feeling of going on these epic adventures where we can choose where we want to go next, and explore new places with the hopes of discovering loot and new powerful weapons to deck our characters out with. Take a break from the main story and just focus on doing great side missions and stuff like that. And this is where Final Fantasy 15 shines the brightest. It has an incredibly impressive sized world map that is filled with incredible unique environments and locations. You have the deserts of the Three Valleys, the tropical and beautiful beaches of Vanith Coast. You have Altissa, this incredibly beautiful and amazingly detailed city that is based somewhat upon Venice, Italy. You have the volcanic mountains of Ravato, which is covered in black volcanic sand and igneous rock. Just the environments and locations in this game are perfect. The amount of detail that went into it is absolutely insane. The cities are filled with people interacting with each other. There's street musicians playing songs. There's vendors selling their goods. There's cars that drive by on the roads that make them feel alive. Just there's a lot of details into this world that makes it feel alive. There is, however, quite a bit of poppin' for the PS4, especially with Altissa. But honestly, it's something I can see past and I care less about when I just see how much time and effort went into the details of the environment. I do have to say, though, where's Crown City? I was kind of surprised that had no appearance whatsoever in this game. Well, it does, but it's from a distance. And you never once enter it until, I think, like late on in the game. But I was kind of hoping that we would be able to explore Crown City in its prime. But with that being said, the world is also filled with a great number of side activities, including, of course, side missions, chocobo racing, new fishing locations for Noctis, stores to stop by, which can sell you a number of basic items, including potions and Phoenix Downs, 2 customizations for your car, 2 even, and I am being 100% honest here, soundtracks from many of the previous Final Fantasy games. which you can listen to during car rides. They even throw in a touch of Final Fantasy XII by including hunt bounties, which you can participate in by talking to one of the many diners throughout the lands, and they each have their own hunts. They give you access to chocobos pretty early on in this game, which is by far one of the most enjoyable modes of transportation throughout the entire game, with them being fairly simple to control and leagues less restricting than your car, the Regalia. With chocobos, you can go almost anywhere you can on foot, and if you come across an enemy encounter while you're riding one, you can literally run right past them, whereas in the car, you have to stop the fucking car, get out, beat the enemy before you continue the journey, or you have to run away and hope the enemy despawns. You can discover quite a lot of loot while you're just exploring the world, and having a chocobo on hand makes this a hell of a lot easier. I didn't realize the importance of loot until a bit later on in this game, and that is primarily due to the game having problems with not explaining very well on how it works. But basically, hunt bounties and loot are your primary source of income throughout the game. Luckily, we have Gladios, whose skill ability allows you to pick up items after battles, loot items. Battling enemies and doing most of the side missions really only gain you experience and some items here and there. I wasn't aware of this and thought that the loot was going to be used for a much more deeper role in like making weapons stronger or something like that. So I went through the first half of the game almost completely broke the entire time, spending what little gil I had on potions. All the while I was hoarding all this loot in my pocket, not knowing what to do with it. So one of the last ingredients to a main series Final Fantasy game is, of course, combat. And how does Final Fantasy XV's combat hold up? Well, first off, it looks like Square Enix looked at some of the basic elements of the combat system from the Dark Souls franchise when they designed this battle style. You have a real-time battle system that not only allows you to dodge attacks by rolling out of the way or warping to a new spot, but you also have the ability to counter and parry attacks as well. Though I did find this pretty simple to get a grasp on, seeing as the dodge is literally just holding down the square button, and the counter and parry is literally just a very brief QuickTime event. So just take that into consideration. It's not as difficult as a Dark Souls game, but it does have some similarities to it. Noctis is also very versatile with what weapons he can use, so you're open to setting him up as you please, and the game does a pretty good job of giving you a variety of different weapon types to play around with. But bear in mind that the weakness of enemies in this game have a much greater focus on weapon types rather than elemental weaknesses. It's kind of like Final Fantasy X in a sense. If you ever played Final Fantasy X, basically there were certain enemies that when you fought them with specific characters, that character would do more damage to them because of their weapons or something like that. But it's basically that kind of a concept. The game realizes this and knows that you need more access to that, so it allows you the menu during battles to switch up your setup. Another element that is similar to the Dark Souls franchise is the Final Fantasy XV leveling system. As you go through the game, you gain experience the typical way, battling enemies, doing side quests, stuff like that. You can also upgrade your Ascension grid so that you're earning experience from various other activities like taking long road trips, fishing, riding chocobos, and other little things like that. The main difference between this game and many of the other Final Fantasy titles in the series is that experience you gain is collected, and it doesn't go straight into your character to improve their level. No, the way that you improve their level is by staying at either a campsite or a motel. Now, there's a difference between the two of them. When you're resting at a campsite, you are able to access Ignis's recipes, where he cooks you a meal, and this gives you stat boosts to your character. When you're sleeping at a motel, a hotel, or a suite, they give you access to an experience multiplier, which will greatly increase the total amount of experience you've collected. The leveling system can be both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in a sense that you can gain a lot of experience in a short amount of time going to the right places. This dramatically improves your character's leveling and stats in a short amount of time as well. Like, I literally did a number of short side quests that took about an hour and a half until I collected a shit ton of experience. Then I went to a particular hotel and rested there and ended up with 300,000 experience, over 300,000 experience points, which shot me up to 10 levels. So yeah, it can be pretty easy to level up, especially in later game if you know what you're doing. The downside to this is that you don't level up in any other way, and this can be pretty tricky for some players early on in the game. If you're in a dungeon and you're struggling to get past the normal enemies, you can't rely on grinding the dungeon to improve your levels. You can collect that experience and then take it to a motel to improve your level that way, but you're still stuck having to make your way back out of the dungeon. Looking back at the dungeons that I struggled through, it seems a little bit silly, knowing what I know now, but at the same time, looking at, how my funds were, how, little gil I was making, and just the situations that I was stuck in, I have a better understanding of it. Combat also has a magic system, which you have to gather up elementary resources throughout the world in order to craft these spells. The crafting system is a kind of a weird one. I still haven't fully grasped the entire concept of it, because the game doesn't really do a good job of explaining the mechanics of it. But basically, you choose the potency of the spell from a number of resources you gather. You can also have multiple effects on spells to either cover more elemental weaknesses, or even have a status ailment effects like poison. Keep in mind, though, that when using a spell, it can be dangerous to not only the enemies, but also your own team. For whatever reason, spells do have friendly fire on them. So when you're casting one that has a large area of effect, you kind of want to make sure that your team is out of the way. Which is, again, a pretty difficult task to do because they like to attack the enemy close range. Summons also make a return as well, though I am a little disappointed in just how many summons are actually in the game. Hint, it's only 4. That you can only use in battle, might I add. I have to say, though, that they are probably some of the best summon animations I have ever seen since Final Fantasy XII. They are beautiful in terms of design and detail, giving them this presence of just incredible power. Ramuh unleashes this incredible arc storm that just leaves the earth around him, scorching. And Shiva leaves this total winter whiteout after her diamond dust attack. Now, summons in this game come at random times, and usually it's when you're getting low on HP. They don't come on your command, but they do seem to come when you need them the most. So they are a spectacle to look at, and I do enjoy that they're there. In all, when it works great. You have a free-flowing combat system that is both simple to pick up, but a challenge to fully master. When it doesn't, you can find yourself constantly getting frustrated battling the camera angle, not being able to see where your character is at all times. This is especially true in areas that are very close quarters, have foliage, or when you're battling multiple enemies or a large enemy. God forbid, all at the same time. Plus, there isn't a button to press to center the camera behind your character so that you can easily keep track of him. So you have to manually do it yourself. There is a lock-on button, but you have to hold it down the entire time, and there's no button to switch who you're targeting, and it breaks away easily. If you don't use the lock-on button, however, you're basically hoping that Noctis is close enough to an enemy to make contact, or else you're just going to be swinging at the air, looking like a golfer trying to swat a bee. The game also has a wait mode for combat, which is an alternative way of fighting, and has to be manually activated in the options menu. This is one of those things that makes me go, why the hell did you put this in the game? So the wait mode is basically when you're not moving, the battle freezes for a length of time. In this time, you are able to take a minute to assess the situation and figure out what you want to do next. From there, you can launch attacks, you can pick targets, you can cast spells, you can cure the team, everything you can do from outside the wait mode. But the wait mode also has another perk that's exclusive to it, and this pisses me off to no end. When you're in wait mode, you can scan enemies to see their resistances and weaknesses. This is something you don't have access to without wait mode. I literally learned this over 50 hours into the game because there was a very brief mention of it in the tutorial of it, but I had completely forgotten about it. At this point, I had already become very well adjusted to the regular active system, and the wait mode was constantly disrupting the flow of battle for me. I also learned this right before I was about to start this review, and one of my main complaints beforehand that I had throughout this entire game is that Ignis was the only character that has access to this ability, and it was completely randomized, so he could do it at any enemy at any time, and I had no control over it. There were so many tough battles I had to fight through, blind, because he straight up refused to use it. Vice versa, there were so many battles where he chooses to use it on enemies that were so far lower level than us, it just took one hit to take him down. In my notes, I put that this ability either needed to be a tactic on him that I could choose when he used it, and it would scan all the enemies in the area that were in battle, and not just one of them, or that it needed to be given to the player who would find the information to be far more valuable, especially with how large the number of possible weaknesses there are. Why the developers opted to give an NPC character that players have no control over an ability that is only useful to players themselves is beyond me. Another issue I have in combat is Prompto and his HP stat. I don't really complain too much when it comes to stats because I don't really pay too much attention to it until later game. But when I'm closing in on level 30 and my teammates are all nearing 3000 HP and Prompto is barely scratching 1000 with accessories, and it's getting to a point where every battle I go into has Prompto constantly needing to be recovered within the first 3 minutes of any battle, there's an issue there. For one, Prompto is constantly one of the first members to charge headfirst into battle and get close range, even though he has the lowest HP and defense stats and he uses a firearm. One would think that his combat focus should be long to mid range, where he can poke damage and have better opportunities to get those critical shots while staying out of range, while the close combat fighters like Noctis and Gladios, who can take those hits, distract the enemies. But instead, every fucking time, it's always him, Ignis, and Gladio who all charge forward and cramp themselves at close range, and it's always Prompto who's the first to fall. Like, I understand that he isn't one of the most trained bodyguards in Noctis' squad, but I also don't think it takes fucking rocket science to figure out that using a firearm at long range while the enemies are distracted on someone else is a much better tactic than trying to pull a Han Solo every time. I also have somewhat of a similar issue with Ignis. I don't actually really know where Ignis is supposed to fit in. He uses daggers and lances, so he's geared more towards a close combat situation, but his HP stat is only slightly higher than Prompto's, and nowhere near Gladios or Noctis. It seems like more or less that he's supposed to be kind of a support character, I want to say, and that he's supposed to be more tactical and aim for more blind spots, but even still, half the time I see him in battle, he's not doing anything, and the other half, he's wailing on an enemy while they beat the shit out of him. I mean, if he's supposed to be a support character, then why is he running headfirst into battle, and why doesn't he have access to buff moves like Protect or Bravery? I know this game really doesn't want to jump into that whole magic and fantasy realm, but come on, it gives these characters some useful abilities. Plus, he becomes twice as useless for a while in the later game after the events of Altissa. Not going to spoil anything, but just be aware of that. I did enjoy the various amount of creative and interesting creatures that roam the world and make it feel alive. And there are definitely some impressive creatures to encounter in this game that are massive. They are a spectacle to see, much less fight. I do, however, have to point out that I wasn't all that impressed by the bosses in this game. I know that the developers wanted to have this game be more grounded in reality, but I kind of feel like that might have hindered them a little bit in terms of creativity, especially when it comes to bosses. Almost all the bosses in the game are either more animal in nature, human/Magitech, or just rehashes of old Final Fantasy monsters like Malboro or the Summons. There was just this lack of those strange and divine creatures that felt almost mythical or godlike. There were some, but not very many at all. Now, this is only 50 hours into the game, and I still haven't 100% completed it, so I'm hoping that this game has a ton of post-game content, including secret bosses, and if it does, I'm hoping that it'll satisfy that itch. Plus, I do have a bit of an issue with how this game has a tendency of treating nature as if it's a plague at times. Like, we come across an incredibly rare creature, and 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a bounty or something, or we're going to have to kill it, just because. This is especially true for the super boss, which, spoilers, if you don't want to hear it, 3, 2, 1. It's Adamantoise. That is the size of a fucking mountain, whose only sin is literally waking up. Really. There is no real justification as to why we're trying to kill this thing, other than it's annoying people because it's stirring in its sleep. Alright, let's talk about some last things I want to bring up in this review. Whenever I'm playing a certain game like this, there are bound to be moments when I get pissed off. And whenever these moments piss me off so much that I rage, I make note of it. For a couple of reasons. One is that it allows me to vent my anger, it allows me to calm down, and I know that when I go back to review the game, those notes will be there, and I can view them with a much clearer mind and make a decision on how I feel about it then. The other reason is that I want to see what went wrong. Was it just me not understanding the game at the time? And if it was there a better way that developers could have handled it? Or was it an intentional game mechanic or some bug that just ruined the flow of the game? And I make a choice. Do I use this against the game? Well, I had 4 moments of rage during this entire game. The first one was an issue where I had enemies that were higher level than me spawn in front of my regalia, which forced me to exit the car, face them, and as soon as I finally beat them and ran back to my regalia, they immediately respawned right into the exact same location, which means if I wanted my car back, I had to fight them all over again. Realizing I was completely outnumbered and outmatched for another battle, I had to leave the regalia behind and carry on by foot. This was a game bug, and in open worlds like this, they tend to happen, so I'll let it slide. The next rage, however, is one I will use against the game. I want to say that within the first 5 to 10 hours of playing this game, I started to realize that there was something weird with the save system. There would be these extendedly long gaps in between autosaves, and I'm talking the last save was like hours ago. I realized that this game had something of a hybrid save system. You either had to manually save from the options menu because there are no save points throughout the game, or you had to visit some area that activated the autosave. The problem arises when you realize that you can't save in dungeons at all. There is no autosave and the manual save is blocked. I spent 2 hours going through a dungeon and got wiped by a boss because I wasn't fully prepared for it. And instead of respawning me at the boss's room or even midway through the dungeon where the mini-boss was, it instead started me at the entrance of the dungeon and reset all of my progress. I lost all my experience from that. After that, I lost a ton of motivation to even pick up the game, and it took me a little bit to find it again. Looking back at the situation and how often I actually did save, I still think that Final Fantasy XV's save system is a major step backwards compared to other titles in the series. The final thing I want to talk about, and it's not a rage moment, but it's definitely been a cause of some of the rages. It's been a reoccurring trend throughout this entire review too. Maybe you noticed it, maybe you didn't. But it's the utter lack of having information on how the game works easy to access. Now, it does give information on how various things work while you're playing, but usually it's those short in-game tutorials that you spam the next button through just so you can play the game. I have yet to find a way to easily review this information again in case I might have missed something or in case I just simply forgot. What I mean by this is that there is no option in the menu screen or the option menu for a detailed guide on how the game works like Square Enix has done many, many times. Usually it's called a journal, a help guide, an index, a manual. World of Final Fantasy calls it a tip jar, but it's always the same thing. It's a selected option in the menu where you can go to and review manuals and tutorials on how the game and its mechanics work. And if you're stuck on something or you forget, that's easy to access information. It's right there for you. And I know there's a combat tutorial, but it vaguely covers some basic elements of how combat work, and it pulls you out of the main game whenever you go to it. Instead, the developers opted for this stupidly over-complex system of scattering the information around in the menu, forcing players to dig through it and try to find the answer they need. It took me hours to figure out some of the basic mechanics of this game, like why my HP wasn't fully recovering after battles, and even now I never got an answer to that. I had to figure that out myself. I mean, it's just basic things, like how to use a chocobo whistle, or even how to put a marker down on a map. Plus, they make the little icons on the bottom of the screen so freaking small that you can easily glance right over it and miss it. Normally these kind of things I don't bitch about, but normally these kind of things don't cause any problems for games that aren't nearly as complex as Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy is a series that is widely known for having complex battle systems, and to not have an easy to access guide in the menu for players to go to and learn or relearn how the game works is completely unacceptable. I live by the rule of thumb. If I'm forced to put down the controller and go to the internet to learn or relearn how the basic mechanics of your game works, then you half-assed your job on explaining how it works. Final Fantasy XV boasts that it's a Final Fantasy for fans and newcomers, and yet it fails to have a decent solution to explaining some of the basic mechanics of its own game, much less some of the more complex ones. Where's the guide for explaining stats for newcomers? Where's the guide to explain status ailments for newcomers? Where's the guide that explains wait mode, fishing, spellcrafting? These are all things that I myself have been looking for and have not been able to find. Well, I don't think I've ever had a game that had so many things I absolutely loved, but also so many things I just can't stand. It's an incredibly beautiful game with gorgeous landscapes that are filled with detail, enjoyable characters that each have their own unique personality, and a battle system that is, for the most part, great. I haven't had this much fun riding chocobos around since I got the gold chocobo in Final Fantasy VII. Topped it off with a great amount of side content in a game, and you have a shiny gem of a Final Fantasy game. But there are also a number of things that don't hit the mark in this one. Bosses weren't nearly as creative as previous ones. The game was rather simple. The save system took steps backwards from previous entries, and the story felt a bit stale towards the end, with a climax that just wasn't as epic as it could have been. Combine that with my other complaints towards the game, and it's a hard choice for me to make on whether this is a great Final Fantasy game or not. So, for my final score for Final Fantasy 15, it's a 7 out of 10. Believe it or not, this score took me a while to settle upon because I really do enjoy this game. What this game does great, I absolutely love, and it keeps me wanting to play more and more. But at the same time, what this game trips on, as a Final Fantasy veteran, leaves a pretty sour taste in my mouth. I can't rate it too high, then I just feel like I'm just being biased towards the Final Fantasy franchise. And I can't rate it too low, or else I feel like I'm being too harsh on the game, for what the most part did what it was going to do. So I ultimately have to leave it to the viewers to decide. Because, remember, I'm just one guy with the divine powers of a PlayStation 4, a YouTube channel, and a passion for gaming. Your opinions differ from mine, and I'd love to hear them in the comments below. If you enjoyed and want to leave a like, it would be greatly appreciated. And of course, if you want to see more of these reviews or just want to become a member of the team because you like my charming and relaxing voice, you are more than welcome to hit the subscribe button. Thank you all for joining me, and as always, I will see you on the next one. Thank you guys as always. This is going to probably be my last review of 2016, and boy, this one took me a long time to do. I put a lot of hard work into this one, so I do hope you guys enjoy. I will see you all in the next one. Mars out.
Hey, we should be able to snag a stone around here, right?